Hey guys, tonight we're heading back way back to a time of philosophers, great dramatists, and the birth of democracy. But we're not going to admire the Parthenon or listen to Socrates debate in the Agora. Not tonight. Tonight we're going on a different kind of tour. You're standing in the heart of ancient Athens, a city you've seen countless times in textbooks, its marble temples gleaming under a perpetually perfect sun. The air is warm, maybe a little hazy, and you feel the rough stone under your sandals. It's exactly as you've imagined, except for one thing: the smell. It hits you like a physical wall, a thick, complex bouquet of everything you've ever thrown away. It's the aroma of rotting fruit, stale sweat, and something far more organic. You probably wouldn't last 5 minutes out here without a clothespin for your nose. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You step off the dirt path and onto a cobbled street, and with each stride a new layer of the city's reality unfolds. It's not a single overpowering odor, but a symphony of less than pleasant notes. There's the sharp tang of fermentation from spilled wine and souring grapes. A sickly sweet note that sits heavily in the humid air. You see a boy carrying a wicker basket that's dripping a dark, murky liquid onto the ground, and you instinctively step to the side. The basket, you realize, is full of fish guts. This isn't a pristine, whitewashed city. It's a living, breathing, and frankly quite messy organism. The idealized image you hold in your mind, the one with clean lines and stoic statues, is just a fraction of the truth. The rest is a chaotic sensory overload of a very different kind. You quickly learn that in ancient Athens, everything has a smell, and most of them are not good. You navigate a narrow alleyway, and your foot brushes against something soft. You flinch and look down only to see a discarded pile of vegetable peelings and what looks like a partially eaten fish head. No one seems to notice. The locals walk right past their expressions, unbothered, their sandals kicking up dust that you suspect is not just dust. You notice a small child playing with a broken clay doll right next to a heap of what you can only describe as household refuse. It's a jarring sight, one that makes you instinctively pull your shirt up over your nose. This is the background noise of life here, the constant, inescapable presence of a city's waste. It's a testament to human resilience, or perhaps just a testament to a complete lack of better options. The truth is, people just got used to it. They lived in a world where waste management was less of a public service and more of a personal problem. And the solution was almost always to just put it outside the door and hope for the best. As you meander further, the street opens up a bit, and you see a group of men gathered, their voices raised in what sounds like a heated discussion. You catch words like "effer" and "agora," and you realize you're near the center of civic life. But even here in the heart of Athenian democracy, the trash is a constant, humbling presence. A fine layer of detritus covers everything from the steps of a public building to the base of a marble statue. You can't help but wonder if the great thinkers of the time, the ones who gave us the foundations of modern philosophy and law, ever had to dodge a stray bone or a puddle of who knows what on their way to deliver a speech. It's a very real and very dirty detail that history books tend to leave out. The very ground you walk on is in many ways an archaeological layer of discarded lives. Every broken amphora, every crumbling piece of roof tile, every scrap of leather is a story waiting to be told if only you have the stomach for it. The challenge of waste in Athens wasn't just a matter of aesthetics, it was a matter of survival. A well-known historical fact is that the ancient Greeks, particularly the Athenians, were innovators in many areas, but public sanitation was not one of them. They had impressive aqueducts and fountains, but a centralized sewer system for household waste was largely non-existent. Instead, you would find open gutters running down the center of many streets designed to carry away stormwater, but often clogged with everything else. You watch as a man empties a chamber pot directly into one of these gutters. The liquid streams down the street, mixing with other runoff and creating a foul, dark river that meanders toward the city's outskirts. This is the reality of urban life here, a constant compromise with filth. It's a stark reminder that even a golden age was built on a foundation of a rather different kind of material. The sheer volume of waste generated by a city of over 100,000 people, all cooking, eating, and living in close quarters, was simply overwhelming for the rudimentary systems in place. Let's get into the specifics of what you're seeing. What exactly constitutes trash in this era? It's not just banana peels and plastic bottles. You see a lot of broken pottery called ostraca. In fact, it's everywhere. A staggering amount of pottery was used for everything from storage to eating, and it broke constantly. These fragments, so common you almost trip over them, are the plastic shards of their world. But they had a fascinating dual purpose. A little-known fact is that these broken bits of pottery, seemingly worthless, were used for political voting. A citizen would scratch the name of a person they wished to banish from the city onto a piece of ostrakhan, and if enough votes were cast against them, they would be ostracized for 10 years. So one man's broken dinner plate became the ballot that sent another into exile. It's a bizarre but clever twist on the old saying that one man's trash is another man's treasure, or in this case, another man's political downfall. Talk about a waste-to-resource model. You're trying to adjust to the sensory assault, but it's difficult. The smells are one thing, but the sheer physical presence of the refuse is another. Piles of ash from cooking fires are often swept out into the street. Animal bones from meals lie where they were tossed. Discarded scraps of wood-old clothing and a bewildering assortment of other materials are all part of the urban landscape. It's a free-for-all, a system where the easiest solution is almost always the chosen one. You get the sense that there are no trash collectors, no public works departments dedicated to sanitation. It's an unspoken agreement that you deal with your own mess, and if you can't, it just becomes everyone else's problem. You see a woman sweep a pile of vegetable scraps out of her doorway and into the street, a perfectly normal act that would get you a hefty fine back home. She doesn't give it a second thought. It's simply the way things are done. Of course not. All parts of the city are equal. As you approach a more affluent neighborhood, the streets are slightly cleaner, the smells a little less potent. Here, wealthy households might employ a slave specifically for the purpose of removing refuse. They'll carry a basket of household garbage to a designated dump site outside the city walls. This is a privilege, a luxury that most ordinary Athenians couldn't afford. For them, the only option was to literally dump it in the street, or if they were particularly motivated, in a communal pit. This created a visible class divide, a stark contrast between the well-kept lanes of the rich and the garbage-strewn alleys of the poor. Historians still debate whether the Athenian government's lack of public sanitation was a result of an intentional policy of neglect or simply a failure of technology and collective will. Was it a conscious decision to let the poorest citizens live in squalor, or did the scale of the problem simply outstrip their capacity to deal with it? It's a question that gets to the very heart of their social structure and priorities. You stop for a moment, leaning against the cool marble of a public well. The water pouring from the spout looks clean, a small oasis in the general mess. A man comes to fill a jug, and as he turns to leave, he nonchalantly tosses a handful of old dead flowers onto the ground. You have to actively fight the urge to say something, but you realize that would be like lecturing a fish on the importance of breathing air. This is their normal. To them, the street is just an extension of their home, a place where refuse goes to be forgotten. The sun, the wind, and the local pigs would eventually take care of it. You can almost see the gears turning in your head, trying to process this. You're in a city that invented philosophy, yet you're standing in a pile of garbage. It's a truly humbling experience. It's a vivid reminder that progress is often a patchwork of incredible genius and baffling oversight. They were capable of building a temple that still stands today, but they couldn't figure out a proper way to deal with their kitchen scraps. It's a little like inventing the internet, but forgetting to invent firewalls. The city's solution to the sheer volume of waste wasn't to collect it, but to move it. The first rule of ancient Athenian waste management seems to have been, if you don't want it, move it to the edge of town. This led to the creation of what can only be described as ancient landfills, giant mounds of garbage just outside the city walls. You catch a glimpse of one from a higher point in the city, a dark, low hill on the horizon that seems to shimmer in the heat. It's not a natural feature. It's a monument to discarded goods. These garbage hills were where the city's detritus was ultimately deposited. They were also a source of income for the poorest residents who would sift through the piles for anything of value, a discarded piece of bronze, a still usable shard of pottery, or even bits of food. It's a grim profession, but a necessary one, and you can see why it would be a last resort. The city also had a surprisingly strict law, a law that seems almost comically out of place given the circumstances. In 500 BC, Athens passed a law mandating that all refuse was to be dumped at least 1 mile outside the city walls. This sounds great in theory, but as you've already seen, the reality on the ground was very different. You imagine the law being more of a suggestion than a strict rule, one that was likely followed by the rich and ignored by everyone else. After all, who was going to enforce it? A city guard. Excuse me, sir, that's a beautiful amphora you just broke. But did you really think you could just leave it there? The fine is 3 drachmas, and you have to personally carry it a full mile outside the city walls. And by the way, that's not a suggestion. I'll be watching you. As the day wears on, you start to notice the smaller, more mundane details that make up the whole picture. The flies, for instance. They are everywhere, a constant buzzing cloud over every pile of garbage. The stray dogs, skinny and watchful, scrounge for a meal among the refuse. You see a group of crows pecking at something on the ground, and you decide it's best not to look too closely. You start to understand that the Greek ideal of beauty and order was in many ways a performance, a grand display built on a less than grand foundation. The art and philosophy are the public face, the marble-clad theater. The trash is the backstage, the messy, unglamorous reality that makes it all possible. It's a truth that feels visceral, a physical and emotional experience that makes you rethink everything you thought you knew about this time period. You're not just observing history, you're smelling it. And trust me, it's not an elegant perfume. You can't help but think about how far we've come. The sheer volume of waste we produce today and our often complicated but functional systems for dealing with it are a testament to the fact that we've at least learned from the ancient world's mistakes. We have trash cans, we have sanitation workers, we have recycling facilities. You see a man selling a string of figs and notice that the fallen ones are simply left on the ground to be trampled and rot. No one thinks to sweep them up. You get the sense that the very concept of cleanliness was a very different thing here. It wasn't about public health as much as it was about personal hygiene. You washed your body, but the city itself was just, well, it was what it was. A big, beautiful, and utterly filthy mess. It's almost nightfall now, and the smells seem to have intensified with the heat of the day. The streetlights of our own time are a world away. Here, the only light comes from flickering torches and the occasional lamp. The refuse piles cast long, distorted shadows, and the sound of scampering rats becomes more noticeable. It's a world that forces you to confront the reality of living on a planet with limited resources and no easy way to get rid of the things you no longer need. It's a world of consequences where every discarded item has to go somewhere, and that somewhere is almost always right underfoot. The grandeur of the Acropolis looms in the distance, a silent, majestic reminder of human achievement. But down here on the street level, in the muck and the mire, you're learning a far more fundamental lesson about what it really means to live in a city and what it truly takes to build a civilization. As the torchlight begins to flicker and cast long, dancing shadows, you find yourself drawn deeper into the residential parts of Athens. The sounds of the city change subtly. The clamor of the agora gives way to the low hum of family life behind closed doors. You can hear the murmur of conversation, the clatter of cooking pots, and the occasional burst of laughter. But woven into this domestic soundscape is another more unsettling rhythm, the quiet thud of something hitting the ground, the rustle of refuse being swept out, the faint splash of liquid hitting the street. The grandeur of the public sphere is one thing, but the true character of a society you're learning is found in what happens inside its homes and what they do with what's left over. And what they do, you quickly realize, is just get rid of it. You peer down a side alley, its walls unadorned, and its floor a matted collection of dust and debris. A woman emerges from a doorway holding a woven basket. It's not for carrying groceries, it's for emptying. With a practiced flick of her wrist, she turns it over and a cascade of household refuse tumbles out. There are fish bones, olive pits, the remains of some sort of flatbread, and a small tangled mess of what looks like old straw. She doesn't even look to see where it lands. It's a simple daily act performed without ceremony or shame. This is the domestic discard, the quiet but constant stream of a family's life emptied out into the public space. There is no central collection service, no designated curbside pickup. The street is the garbage can, and everyone is expected to add to it. It's a very laissez-faire approach to sanitation, and the result is exactly what you'd expect. The lack of a centralized system means every household is an island responsible for its own waste. And the most common, most convenient solution is to simply open the door and throw it out. You can imagine the daily routine: a meal is finished, the scraps are gathered, and out they go. A pot breaks. Its shards are tossed into the alley. A worn-out piece of cloth. A bundle of old reeds. Out they go. It's a constant, never-ending trickle of refuse, accumulating day after day, week after week. The most you might see is a local with a shovel pushing the worst of the mess further into the street or into a nearby gutter, a temporary solution at best. The entire city is built on this principle of externalizing waste, of moving it from the private space of the home to the public space of the street. It's a very different mindset from our own, where we are trained from a young age that the street is not a place for our trash. Let's talk about one of the most significant domestic waste problems, one that really makes you appreciate modern plumbing. A simple historical fact is that indoor toilets with flushing systems were not a feature of most ancient Greek homes. Instead, people relied on chamber pots. These were exactly what they sound like: ceramic or wooden vessels used to collect human waste. You can see a couple of them sitting by a doorway, their contents covered by a small cloth, waiting for their inevitable fate. And what was that fate? Well, it varied. In some homes, the contents of the chamber pot would be carried out to a communal latrine, a simple ditch or pit shared by several families. In other cases, they would be emptied into a larger container and sold to farmers who would use it as fertilizer for their fields. This was a relatively common practice, and it's one of those things that makes you reconsider the good old days. The idea of using human waste to grow your food is a powerful reminder of how resource-intensive and well-dirty their lives were. It's a perfectly logical solution in a society that valued recycling, even if it's a difficult one for us to stomach. It's a stark contrast to our own reliance on chemical fertilizers and our complete separation of our waste from our food supply. But sometimes the chamber pot contents had a much simpler and less dignified journey. You see a light go on in a second-story window. A moment later, a figure appears holding something over the windowsill. You instinctively take a step back, and a moment later there's a splash on the street below. You've just witnessed the ancient equivalent of a drive-by. It was a common, if highly unsanitary, practice. Some ancient sources even mention laws to protect people from being hit by falling refuse. Talk about a public health hazard. Historians still debate whether Athenian citizens were fully aware of the health risks associated with their sanitation practices, or if they simply lacked the scientific knowledge to connect the filth with the frequent outbreaks of disease. It's hard for us to imagine a world where you don't instantly link a cesspool with cholera, but for them it might have just been the way things are. They were capable of incredible feats of reason and logic, but when it came to microscopic pathogens, they were still in the dark. It's a reminder that even the smartest people in the world can't solve a problem they don't know exists. The trash from a single household wasn't just organic waste. You'd find all kinds of things. Bits of broken loom weights, worn-out shoes, and old tools would all be discarded. The Greek words for these items are as beautiful as their names for philosophy, but their final resting place was anything but. A potter's workshop nearby, for example, generates a huge amount of waste clay scraps, failed pots, and broken molds. These are often just piled up behind the building, a monument to their failures. It's a physical manifestation of their recycling culture. They didn't have the concept of a single-use plastic bag, but they had 1,000 other things they used and then threw away. And for every discarded item, there was a quiet, unassuming act of disposal. A simple toss, a simple sweep, a simple act of walking away and leaving it for the elements to handle. The city was in a very real sense the collective garbage heap of its inhabitants. There's a subtle but fascinating detail in all of this. A truly unique and little-known detail is that while many people threw their household waste into the streets, a small minority of homes had what were called sumps or cesspits. These were small underground pits dug into the floor of a courtyard, often lined with clay, which were used for the collection of human waste and other refuse. They were a slightly more sophisticated, if still rudimentary, solution to the problem. These cesspits were a private hidden system of waste management, a sign of both wealth and a higher standard of living. When they filled up, they would be emptied by a specialist, someone who would cart the waste away to the fields or to a dump site. It was an expensive service, but a welcome one for those who could afford it. This creates a very clear contrast. The rich could pay to have their trash removed, while the poor had to live with it right outside their door. It's a classic tale of two cities, one relatively clean and one decidedly not. You can't help but think about how a modern-day health inspector would react to all of this. They would probably just sit down and cry. You see a dog scavenging from a pile of refuse, and you can't help but wonder what diseases it's carrying. The flies are a constant presence, buzzing around every pile of decaying organic matter, and you know without a doubt that they are a vector for all kinds of unseen horrors. The people here, to their credit, seem unbothered. They just live with it. They walk over it, they eat near it, and they probably don't even notice the smell after a while. It's a testament to the human capacity to adapt, even to the most disgusting conditions. I suppose that's one of the reasons we made it as a species. We're good at ignoring the worst parts of our reality until they become impossible to ignore. As you walk on, you can see the light from a lantern inside a home. Through an open window, you can just make out a family gathered around a table. You hear a sound of a clay cup dropping and shattering. You can imagine the scene perfectly. A brief moment of frustration, maybe a quick scolding, and then the shards are gathered up. And where will they go? Probably just tossed outside the window. It's a cycle of use and discard that is as natural to them as breathing. The street, the alley, the open field. These are all just extensions of their personal trash bin. There's no moral or ethical dilemma to it, it's just how you live. You don't think about what happens to a banana peel after you throw it away. Here you see exactly what happens to an olive pit. It becomes a part of the ground, a part of the city's unwritten history, a layer of the past that archaeologists will one day unearth piece by piece. The domestic habits of the ancient Greeks were not just about personal responsibility. They were a reflection of a society that had not yet grappled with the consequences of urbanization. When everyone lived in a small village, you could just throw your trash out and it would disappear into the fields. But when 100,000 people are doing the same thing in a city with no organized sanitation, you get what you're seeing now. The filth is a direct and unavoidable consequence of their success. The very thing that allowed them to build a great civilization, the concentration of a large population in a single area, was also the thing that created a massive, unmanageable waste problem. It's a classic paradox of progress. You solve one problem and create 100 new ones. And in this case, a lot of those new problems just smelled really bad. You watch as a couple of slaves carry a large, heavy jar out of a home and to a large open-air pit just outside the walls of the city. You get the sense that they are an anomaly, a sign of a wealthier household trying to be more responsible. But for most, the street is the pit. The alley is the latrine. The lack of a centralized system means that every act of discard is an individual one, a personal decision made without regard for the collective consequence. You see a broken vase, its intricate painting now, just a series of fractured lines on a shard of clay. Once a thing of beauty, a part of someone's life, now just refuse. It's a humbling sight, a reminder that every grand civilization is built not just on its achievements, but also on the mountains of garbage it leaves behind. And in ancient Athens, those mountains were literally right outside your door. The sun rises again, and as the new day dawns over Athens, you find yourself seeing the city with a different eye. You're no longer just overwhelmed by the general stench and chaos. You're beginning to notice the details, the specific components of the mess. Your gaze keeps getting pulled to the ground, to the thousands of broken shards of pottery that litter every street, every alley, and every public space. They are the city's ubiquitous jagged wallpaper. You see them underfoot, embedded in the dirt and piled in heaps by the sides of buildings. Each one is a fragment of a forgotten vessel, a once useful pot or vase, now nothing more than garbage. But you've heard the whispers, you've read the history, and you know. that some of these seemingly worthless bits of refuse held a power far greater than the complete vessels they once were. They are ostraca, and in the hands of the Athenian people, they were the ultimate political weapon. You picture the scene. It's an assembly day. The Nix, a large hill and meeting place for the Democratic Assembly, is bustling with thousands of male citizens. They've come to vote on a matter of the highest importance who, if anyone, should be ostracized. This isn't a vote for a new leader or a new law. This is a vote to temporarily banish a fellow citizen, a man they believe has become too powerful, too arrogant, or too much of a threat to the democracy they so cherish. And the ballots for this monumental decision, they are the very shards you've been walking on for days. The democratic process is literally being carried out with trash. It's a beautifully ironic and deeply humbling thought. You can't help but be struck by the fact that the same kind of refuse you saw a little girl playing with yesterday is today being used to shape the political future of the most influential city in the world. It's a very different kind of vote than the ones we're used to. No fancy voting booths, no electronic tallying, just a pile of broken pottery and the will of the people. A fundamental historical fact is that ostracism was a unique and powerful democratic tool in ancient Athens designed to prevent the rise of a tyrant. Once a year, the citizens would vote on whether to hold an ostracism. If they decided to proceed, the vote itself would take place 2 months later. Each citizen would take a single piece of pottery, a simple potsherd, and scratch onto it the name of the man they wished to see banished. The process was simple, direct, and completely public. You would walk up to a designated spot in the agora surrounded by your fellow citizens and deposit your ostracon into a large urn. The stakes were incredibly high. If a person's name appeared on at least 6,000 of these ballots, they were exiled for a period of 10 years. They weren't stripped of their citizenship or their property, but they were forced to leave the city. It was a dramatic and often brutal way of keeping political rivals in check. Imagine if every year your coworkers voted on who had to go work from home for a decade. The tension would be unbearable. You can almost feel the weight of one of these shards in your hand. It's rough often with the remnants of painted designs on one side. The other side is smooth, perfect for scratching a name. The tool for this a sharp bit of metal or another stone, something you could easily carry. The names scratched onto these fragments are often surprisingly hurried and messy, as if the voters were in a rush, or simply not used to writing. You can picture a farmer more comfortable with a plow than a stylist carefully etching out the letters of a powerful politician's name, the weight of his vote, a small physical thing in his hand. The act itself is so visceral, so personal, it's not an anonymous click on a screen. It's a physical choice, a small piece of garbage imbued with the power to change a man's life. But what if the system wasn't as pure as we'd like to believe? Historians still debate whether ostracism was a truly democratic check on power, or if it was more often a tool for personal vendettas and political maneuvering. Was it a last resort to protect democracy? Or was it a convenient way for one faction to get rid of a political opponent? You can easily imagine the political parties of the time. Yes, they had them in a way handing out pre-inscribed shards to their supporters, a ready-made ballot to cast against their rivals. This practice is not just speculation. A fascinating and little-known detail is that archaeologists have discovered a cache of ostraca from a single location that all bear the name of Themistocles, the great Athenian statesman, and are all written in the same handwriting. This discovery strongly suggests that someone was mass-producing the ballots, a clear sign of organized campaigning, and a premeditated attempt to influence the vote. It makes you wonder, was it really the people's will? Or was it just a well-funded smear campaign? The democratic process, it seems, has always had its own brand of dirty tricks. The irony of this system is that the people being voted on were often incredibly important figures. The very men who built the city, who commanded armies, or who proposed groundbreaking laws were the ones most at risk. The name Themistocles, for example, appears on many recovered ostraca. He was the hero of the Battle of Salamis, a military genius who saved Athens from the Persians. And yet the citizens eventually voted to ostracize him. It's a very Athenian thing to do, to celebrate a hero and then, out of fear that his power will become too great, to send him away. It's a constant nervous check on power, an almost paranoid form of democracy. It's as if their system of government had its own built-in self-destruct button, ready to be activated with a handful of broken clay. You see a child on the street using a couple of ostraca to make a toy city. The irony is lost on him, of course. To him, they are just interesting shapes, but you know that the pieces he's playing with might have the names of Timon or Aristides scratched into them, men who were once household names. Their reputation's now just a forgotten piece of trash. The sheer volume of these shards is what's so staggering. Imagine the cleanup after one of these votes. The public urns would be emptied, and the tens of thousands of ostraka would simply be tossed into a pile, becoming part of the city's ever-growing detritus. And for modern archaeologists, these piles are a treasure trove. They are a physical record of the people's thoughts, a snapshot of political sentiment frozen in clay. They tell a story that goes beyond the official histories and the speeches of the elites. They tell you who the people were angry with, who they were afraid of, and who they trusted. It's a goldmine of political gossip 100,000 years after the fact. The system of ostracism, as messy and fraught with human foibles as it was ultimately a democratic one. It wasn't perfect, but it was a genuine attempt to put power in the hands of the many, not the few. And it was done with the most basic, most democratic of materials, a piece of trash. You can't help but smile at the thought. The same city that gave us the idea of democracy also gave us the idea of voting with your literal garbage. It's a wonderfully weird blend of high-minded ideals and lowbrow reality. It's the kind of thing you can't make up. It's the ultimate expression of the Athenian spirit to turn something utterly mundane into something of profound political significance. As the day turns to dusk again, you walk on no longer just seeing a street full of dirt and refuse, but a historical record laid out at your feet. Every shattered piece of pottery is a whisper from the past, a silent witness to a life that was lived. Some of them held wine, others oil, and still others the name of a politician whose career was about to come to a screeching halt. It's a powerful reminder that history isn't just about kings and generals. It's about the small, everyday objects, the things we use and then throw away. And in ancient Athens, it was those things that were the true bedrock of their society, the silent, unassuming artifacts of a democratic experiment unlike any other. You pick up a shard, its edge worn smooth by centuries of being buried, and for a moment you hold not just a piece of trash but a piece of political history in your hand. The sun has now reached its zenith, and the heat of the Athenian day seems to magnify every odor, every sight, and every sound. You've become somewhat accustomed to the refuse in the streets, a sort of grim acceptance of the solid waste. But as you continue your journey, your attention is drawn to a different kind of flow, a more insidious and pervasive kind of mess, the liquid waste. It runs in trickles and puddles, in muddy streams and stagnant pools. You realize that a city isn't just defined by its buildings and its people, but by the things that flow through its veins, both literally and metaphorically. And in ancient Athens, those veins were open, unprotected, and filled with a constant foul mixture of everything a city produces. You find yourself on a slightly sloping street, and as you look down, you see a narrow channel running down the center. It's not a sewer, not a covered drain. It's an open gutter, a simple ditch cut into the cobblestones. The water in it is a dark, murky brown, thick with sediment and who knows what else. It moves sluggishly, a slow, unpleasant river that collects everything in its path. You watch as a woman empties a bucket of used wash water from a doorway, adding to the flow. A little further on, a man rinses his hands after working with some animal hides, and that water too joins the current. And you know because you've seen it that this channel is also the final destination for the contents of countless chamber pots. This is the city's plumbing system, and it is entirely open to the world. The sheer volume of waste is staggering, and it's all just there. Exposed to the air, to the sun, and to the flies that buzz over it in thick black clouds. This lack of a closed centralized sewer system is a constant gnawing public health problem, a silent threat that you can almost feel in the air. A key historical fact is that while other ancient civilizations, most notably the Romans, developed complex and comprehensive underground sewer systems, the Athenians largely relied on these primitive open-air gutters for the disposal of their wastewater. It's a striking contrast. They were intellectual giants, but Their public health infrastructure was, by modern standards, incredibly rudimentary. They had the Parthenon, but they didn't have a proper drain. It's a reminder that genius is often compartmentalized, and a society can be brilliant in one area while completely failing in another. The liquid waste isn't just a simple river, it's a stew. It's runoff from the street's kitchen water, the contents of latrines, and animal waste. You see a stray dog urinating near the edge of a puddle, and the thought of all this mixing together is enough to make you instinctively hold your breath. And when it rains, you can only imagine. A downpour would turn these streets into a raging torrent of filth, a flash flood of everything the city has been collecting. The mud would be thick and deep, and the stench would be unbearable. You can almost see the local citizens bundled up against the rain, trying to navigate a street that has become a liquid landfill. It's a terrifying image, a reminder that the seemingly mundane weather could in this time become a public health catastrophe. The lack of a proper sewer system wasn't just a problem for the public, it was a problem for private citizens too. The absence of a central system meant that every household had to deal with its own wastewater. A fascinating and little-known detail is that Athenian law stipulated that a latrine or cesspit had to be dug at a specific distance from a neighbor's property and a public well. This shows a rudimentary understanding of the potential for contamination, a very basic attempt to prevent the worst public health outcomes. They knew that human waste could foul the water supply even if they didn't know the exact mechanism. It's a small victory for common sense in a city that otherwise seems to be taking its chances with fate. It's like putting a danger sign on a cliff edge but not bothering to build a fence. They were aware of the problem, but their solutions were a little half-hearted. You walk past a public fountain, its water sparkling clean as it flows from a marble spout. It's a beautiful, refreshing sight, an oasis in the filth. But you can't help but wonder where the water comes from and what kind of waste it's flowing over to get here. The very ground you're standing on is saturated with the runoff of generations of Athenians. The water may look clean at the spout, but what's it like a few feet away, or what's the quality of the groundwater? Historians still debate whether a lack of effective sanitation was a primary factor in the devastating plagues that periodically swept through Athens. The city was particularly vulnerable during times of war when a large concentrated population, including refugees from the countryside, was living in close quarters. The conditions were perfect for the spread of disease, and the lack of a proper sewer system would have made it even worse. The Great Plague of Athens, for instance, which decimated the city during the Peloponnesian War, is often attributed to the unsanitary conditions. It's a grim possibility to consider that the very things they failed to manage, their own waste, may have been a silent enemy that ultimately defeated them. The city's primitive drains and gutters are a constant, low-level public health threat. You see rats scurrying in the shadows, their tails flicking through the dirty puddles. The sheer number of insects is overwhelming. This is a city that by its very design encourages the spread of disease. A single case of illness, a single person with a fever, and, with a sickening certainty that the waste they produce once it's dumped into the street is going to be carried far and wide, spreading the sickness. It's a very different way of thinking about life and death. In our world, we've largely sanitized death out of our daily routine, pushing disease and waste into the background. Here, it's all right there, a constant visceral presence. It's a wonder anyone lived to be old. It's a miracle they didn't all just get sick and die at a young age. The open gutters were also, in a very real sense, a source of commerce. People would sell their waste to farmers as fertilizer. Others would collect the waste to be used in tanning leather, a process that required a surprising number of things. The gutters were also a source of water for animals, for washing clothes, and for all kinds of other uses that you would probably prefer not to think about. It was a kind of primitive, disgusting recycling system. Nothing was truly wasted, not because they were environmentally conscious, but because they had to be. In a world with limited resources and no central waste management, everything had a secondary use, even if that use was a little less than pleasant. It's a system of desperate practicality, a society making do with what it had, no matter how gross. As evening approaches, the air cools, but the smells linger, a ghostly reminder of the day's filth. The shadows of the temples on the Acropolis seem to cast a blanket of moral and intellectual superiority over the city, but you know the truth. Below that pristine marble, the streets are a network of open drains, a slow-moving river of waste. The Athenians were masters of the mind, but when it came to their own bodily functions and the consequences of a large population, they were still in the Stone Age. It's a strange dichotomy to hold in your mind a city that gave us democracy, philosophy, and theater, but couldn't figure out a proper way to deal with their own poop. And that, in a nutshell, is the beautifully complicated and utterly disgusting truth of ancient Athens. As you continue your quiet journey through the sleeping city, you feel a subtle shift in the air. The smells you've grown accustomed to, the sour wine, the fish guts. The ever-present stench of the gutters begin to fade, replaced by a slightly cleaner, if still earthy scent. The ground under your feet feels different too. The dirt and dust are still there, but the layers of discarded refuse seem thinner. You've moved from the poor, crowded neighborhoods to the more affluent quarters, and here you find a very different and very unequal approach to sanitation. This is where you see the clear, stark line between those who had the luxury of cleanliness and those who did not. In ancient Athens, your social status was often reflected not just in the clothes you wore or the house you lived in, but in how you handled your trash. You walk past a large house with a high plaster-coated wall, a far cry from the cramped mud brick dwellings you've seen elsewhere. The door is thick and wooden, and you imagine the comfort and space within. Inside, you know there might be a private latrine. A key historical fact is that wealthier Athenian homes often had their own private toilets, a luxury that was far out of reach for the average citizen. These weren't flushing toilets, of course, but they were a significant step up from a simple chamber pot. They were usually a small room, a stone slab with a hole in it, often over a cesspit or a drain that carried the waste to a larger pit outside the house. This private system meant that the residents of this home did not have to walk out into the street with a bucket of human waste. They didn't have to contribute to the foul rivers in the gutters. They were able to separate themselves physically and symbolically from the filth of the common man. It's a fundamental difference in daily life, one that would have been deeply felt. The cleanliness of a wealthy neighborhood was not, however, an accident. It was the result of a conscious effort, and it was a direct reflection of a class divide that was both obvious and unspoken. The wealthier families had the means to pay for a better standard of living. This often involved hiring or owning slaves whose specific job it was to manage household waste. These individuals would empty the private latrines, gather up the kitchen scraps, and carry the refuse to a designated dump site, sometimes well outside the city. It's a very different system from the one you saw in the poorer quarters where every family was on their own. Here, sanitation was a service, a part of the daily household routine managed by those with no choice in the matter. The social hierarchy was literally built on a foundation of one group of people handling the other group's waste. It's a pretty powerful and humbling thought. This brings us to a specific and fascinating profession. A unique and little-known detail is the role of the koprologos, a word that literally translates to dung collector. These were often slaves or members of the lowest social classes who made a living by collecting and removing waste from the city. They were the silent, unseen heroes of Athenian life, the people who were responsible for carting away the filth that everyone else tried to ignore. They would work with carts or donkeys traveling from house to house, emptying the cesspits and collecting the household refuse. Their profession was considered one of the lowest and most despised, and their work was often done at night under the cover of darkness so as not to offend the sensibilities of the more respectable citizens. Imagine a job so gross that it has to be done after the sun goes down. Their existence is a powerful testament to the social divide. The rich could pay someone to deal with their mess, while the poor just had to live in it. This raises a compelling question about the mindset of the elite. Historians still debate whether the Athenian elite felt a moral or civic responsibility to improve public sanitation for everyone, or if their focus remained on their private comfort. Did the men who gave stirring speeches about civic duty and the common good ever consider that the same principles should apply to their city's sanitation? It's an easy thing to give a speech about democracy on the Knicks, but a very different thing to walk through a neighborhood filled with garbage. The evidence seems to suggest that for many, their private cleanliness was enough. The responsibility for public sanitation was either ignored or pushed onto the shoulders of the poorest members of society. It's a pattern we still see today, a constant struggle between private convenience and public good. The Athenians were in this sense no different than us. They were just as willing to look the other way when it came to a problem that didn't directly affect them. The public institutions, too, had a better handle on their sanitation than the average citizen. The temples, for instance, had a massive amount of waste to deal with, particularly from the animal sacrifices. These animals were slaughtered on altars, their guts and bones creating a huge, messy problem. But the priests and temple workers would have had a system in place to deal with this, a designated area for the refuse and laborers to cart it away. It was a matter of respect and ritual purity. Similarly, the public buildings of the agora would have had some form of rudimentary latrine, a simple ditch or pit that was periodically cleaned out. Their very status as public important spaces demanded a certain level of cleanliness. You see this everywhere. Cleanliness is equated with prestige. The more important the place or the person, the cleaner the surroundings. The contrast is striking. You can picture a wealthy Athenian in his well-kept home enjoying a meal in a clean dining room, the sounds of the city muffled by the thick walls. He would be completely removed from the filth of the streets. And you can picture a poor family living in a cramped one-room house, their food scraps thrown out the door, their chamber pot emptied into the open gutter. The same city, the same sky, but two entirely different realities. It's a physical representation of the social divide, a layer of filth that separated the haves from the have-nots. The rich could buy their way out of the most basic and fundamental problems of urban life, while the poor had to live in them. This brings a certain kind of weight to the political discussions we saw earlier. When a wealthy politician, a man who has never had to empty his own chamber pot or step over a pile of refuse, stands up and talks about the greatness of Athens, you have to wonder what he's really talking about. Is he talking about the city? He sees the clean, orderly neighborhoods and the magnificent temples? Or is he talking about the city that you've seen, the one filled with waste and disease? The truth is, it was both. Ancient Athens was a city of incredible contrasts of beautiful ideas and ugly realities. And nowhere was that contrast more apparent than in the way it handled its waste. The cleanliness of the elite was built on the back of the filth of the masses. And that in its own way is just as much a part of their history as the Parthenon. You've seen the filth of the streets, the hidden luxury of the elite, and the surprising political power of a broken piece of pottery. But all of that waste, all of that daily discard, has to go somewhere. The city, as you've discovered, is not a final resting place. It is just a temporary collection point. And so, with a weary sense of inevitability, you follow the flow of waste out of the city gates. You leave the relative order of the agora and the residential quarters behind, and step onto the well-worn dirt paths that lead into the countryside. The air begins to clear, the sounds of the city grow faint, but a new, more profound smell begins to take its place. It's a familiar bouquet, but now it's concentrated, intensified, a raw and undeniable scent of decay. This is the scent of the city's underbelly, the place where all of its beautiful illusions and grand ideas are laid to rest. It doesn't take long to find it. You can see it on the horizon, a low, unnatural hill that shimmers in the heat of the afternoon sun. It's a monument to waste, a slow-moving mountain of refuse. This is the kopron, the Greek word for dung heap, or more broadly, a dumping ground. It's not just a single designated area, it's a collection of mounds and pits, a sprawling, chaotic landscape of everything the city has discarded. This is the end of the line for a broken amphora, a worn-out sandal, a dead animal, and the countless buckets of human waste that were carried out here by the unfortunate few who were paid to do so. A key historical fact is that ancient Athenian law mandated that all public refuse was to be dumped a certain distance outside the city walls, typically around 1 mile. This was their version of a landfill, a way to physically separate the city's problems from the city itself. The logic was simple: out of sight, out of mind. But the Koparon isn't just a static dump site. It's a living, breathing place teeming with a surprising amount of life. You see a family of pigs rooting through a pile of what looks like kitchen scraps, their snouts caked in filth. You see flocks of crows and gulls picking through the refuse, their cries filling the air. And most importantly, you see people. They are the scavengers, the rag pickers, and the impoverished who come here to find what they can. They sift through the garbage with a quiet, focused desperation, their eyes sharp looking for anything of value. A broken piece of bronze that can be melted down a ceramic pot that's still mostly intact, a piece of old leather that can be repurposed. This is a very real economy built on the refuse of others. It's a job that requires no skill, only a strong stomach and a profound sense of need. The things we would never even bother to look at are to them a potential meal, a piece of clothing, or a few precious coins. As you get closer, you realize that the Cope Ron is a kind of historical time capsule. The layers of refuse are a record of the city's past, laid down year after year, century after century. A fascinating and little-known detail is that archaeologists today have found these ancient dump sites to be an invaluable source of information about daily life in ancient Athens. By sifting through the layers of garbage, they can learn about the diets of the people, the kinds of tools and pottery they used, and even the trade routes that brought goods into the city. A simple pile of discarded fish bones can tell you what kind of fish they ate. The remains of a broken tool can tell you how they worked. The countless broken pieces of pottery, those ostraca you saw earlier, are a political history written in refuse. It's a goldmine of data, all thanks to the fact that the Athenians had no better way to deal with their waste than to just pile it up. It's the ultimate irony, the very things they tried to hide from their city are the things that tell us the most about it. The people who work here are a stark contrast to the philosophers and playwrights of the city. Their clothes are ragged, their faces are smudged with dirt, and their hands are stained with the refuse they handle. Their lives are defined by what others throw away. They are a constant, quiet reminder that for all of Athens' brilliance and beauty, there was a deeply ugly underbelly, a world of desperation and poverty. Historians still debate whether the Athenian government's waste disposal laws were genuinely intended to improve public health, or if they were simply a way to move the problem out of sight, preserving the clean image of the city center for the wealthy and powerful. Was the law a sincere attempt to make the city better, or was it just a way of sweeping the problem under the rug, a form of aesthetic and class-based legislation? The existence of these massive, foul-smelling dump sites and the desperate lives that revolved around them would suggest the latter. The sheer scale of the waste here is breathtaking. It's not just a small mound, it's a series of hills, each one representing a different period of time. You can see the layers, the various kinds of soil and refuse mixed together. It's a living, breathing landscape of decay. It's a testament to the fact that no matter how hard you try to build a beautiful, perfect civilization, you are still at the end of the day human. You still eat, you still break things, and you still produce waste. And that waste has to go somewhere. The Athenians, for all their brilliance, never found a better solution than this. They never found a way to truly get rid of their problems. They just found a way to move them. And in doing so, they created a very real and very visible divide between their high-minded ideals and their very dirty reality. You watch as a man with a cart, probably a koprologos, empties a large jar of what you know to be human waste onto the ground, adding another layer to the hill. The sight is both grotesque and completely mundane. It's just another part of the daily routine. He doesn't even look at what he's doing. It's just a job. This is the reality of urban life in ancient Athens. It is built on a foundation of intellectual achievement, but it's also built on a mountain of garbage. You can't have one without the other. It's a necessary compromise, a quiet and disgusting truth that underlies all the glory. And as the sun begins to set, casting a golden light over the city in the distance, you're left with a very clear, very visceral image, a beautiful city on the horizon, and a mountain of its own filth right here at your feet. As the sun begins its descent, you find yourself back in the city, but this time you are drawn to the most sacred of places. You're at the foot of the Acropolis, the very heart of Athenian religion and power. The air here, you notice, is different. It's thick with the scent of incense, but that sweet, cloying aroma is laced with something else, a smell that is both metallic and earthy. It's the smell of blood. You're witnessing the intersection of the divine and the disgusting, the moment where high-minded belief meets the very messy reality of an animal's death. This is the sacred and the mundane muck, the truth that even the gods require a cleanup crew. A fundamental historical fact is that animal sacrifice was a central and essential part of ancient Greek religious practice. It wasn't just a quiet prayer or a simple offering. It was a loud, bloody, and communal event. You can see the remnants of such a ritual. A large stone altar stands outside the temple, its surface stained with dark splotches. The air around it is thick with flies. A group of priests and supplicants are moving away their faces, a mixture of piety and relief. But the aftermath of their devotion is a very real, very physical mess. An animal, a goat perhaps, has been slaughtered. Its entrails have been removed, some parts burned as an offering to the gods and others prepared for a communal meal. But what about the rest? The bones, the uneaten bits, the blood that is soaked into the ground. All of that has to go somewhere. The ritual itself, the killing of an animal in a sacred space, created a huge amount of very profane refuse. The temple was not just a place of prayer, it was in its own way a processing plant. The waste from a single sacrifice might seem manageable, but with hundreds of sacrifices taking place over a year, the problem becomes immense. The temple authorities had to have a plan for this. They couldn't just let the refuse pile up on the sacred grounds. It would be an affront to the gods and a public health nightmare. So what did they do? They had to find a way to reconcile the glorious act of worship with its unglamorous aftermath. It's a testament to the practical nature of the Greeks that they didn't just ignore the problem. They made it a part of their ritual life. You see a group of individuals, probably slaves or low-status workers, moving in to clean up the mess. They're carrying buckets and brooms, their faces impassive. They are the final and most essential part of the ritual. Their job is to remove the physical remnants of the sacred act to restore the space to a state of purity. It's a powerful symbol. The purity of the gods is only achievable through the labor of the impure, the people who have to handle the filth. It's a very real and very dirty kind of sacred service. They sweep up the bones, the blood-soaked soil, and any other refuse, and they carry it all away. Where does it go? Probably to a nearby pit or to the general waste stream that you've already seen. The sacred waste becomes, in its own way, just another part of the city's general filth. There's a quieter, more symbolic side to this. Historians still debate whether the ritualistic disposal of sacrificial waste was primarily about hygiene, or if it was a symbolic act to separate the sacred from the profane. Was it simply a practical necessity, a way of keeping the temple from becoming a public health hazard? Or was it a deep-seated belief that the profane matter of the animal's body, after the sacred spirit had been offered to the gods, had to be removed and treated in a specific way? It's a chicken or the egg question. The practicality of hygiene and the symbolism of purity were probably so intertwined that it's impossible to separate them. They just knew that the sacred act had a profane aftermath and that the latter had to be dealt with. It's a very Greek solution to make something deeply philosophical out of something deeply disgusting. Let's not forget the other forms of waste that were created by a religious society. People would leave offerings at shrines and altars, small clay figurines, flowers, pieces of food. All of this in time would decay and become part of the general mess. Priests and temple workers had to deal with this too. A fascinating and little-known detail is that certain ancient sources mention that dogs were often kept near temples to consume the leftover scraps of sacrificed animals. It's a kind of biological garbage disposal, a way of dealing with the waste problem in a very simple, very direct way. The very animals that were considered a nuisance in the streets became a vital part of the sacred ecosystem. It's a perfect example of a society that had to use every resource it had, no matter how gross. The temples, for all their beauty, were often a source of significant pollution. The smoke from the altars would fill the air, the blood would stain the ground, and the refuse would be a constant problem. And yet, the people would come day after day to worship. They were able to separate the spiritual from the physical, the sacred from the mundane. They could ignore the smell, the flies, and the messy reality of what was happening, and focus on the divine. It's a kind of willful ignorance, a very human capacity to see what we want to see and ignore what we don't. You can almost hear the conversation between a priest and a young acolyte. The acolyte new to the job asks about the cleanup process. The priest, a man who has seen 1,000 sacrifices, just shrugs. The gods require the offering. He would say, and we require the broom. It's a very simple, very honest way of putting it. The gods are concerned with the spiritual and the humans are concerned with the practical. And the practical in ancient Athens almost always involved a broom and a pile of filth. It's a reminder that even the most beautiful and high minded parts of their society were built on a very solid and very smelly foundation of reality. As the sun begins its quiet ascent, you find yourself back in the streets, a different kind of commerce awakening around you. You've seen the waste, you've smelled the waste, and you've even seen how the city's elite try to distance themselves from it. But for a significant portion of Athens' population, waste isn't a problem to be avoided. It's a living. It's the raw material for a variety of professions that thrive on what others throw away. This is the city's informal economy, a quiet, unseen world of scavengers who navigate the same streets you do, but with a very different purpose. You see them in the pre-dawn light moving through the narrow alleys, their figures hunched over their eyes, scanning the ground. They are the rag pickers, the bone collectors, and the koprologoi, the dung collectors. Their tools are simple: a basket, a sack, a long stick with a hook on the end. Their work is a testament to the Athenian principle of not letting anything go to waste, not out of environmental consciousness, but out of sheer economic necessity. A general historical fact is that in many pre-modern cities, a whole class of laborers made a living by sorting through and recycling the city's refuse. This was a common feature of urban life, a silent but essential part of the urban ecosystem. You can't have a throwaway society without the people who do the throwing away, but you also can't have one without the people who collect the things that are thrown away. You notice a man with a large sack, his hands caked with dirt, sifting through a pile of refuse near a public latrine. He pulls out a worn-out piece of leather, examines it, and carefully places it in his bag. This is a potential new sandal, or perhaps a patch for an old one. He then pulls out a handful of what looks like old rags. These aren't worthless. Rags could be used for a variety of purposes, from cleaning cloths to raw material for papyrus. In a world where every piece of cloth was a valuable commodity, even a discarded rag was a find. He moves on, his eyes still on the ground, his gaze unblinking. He is a part of a quiet, relentless system, a human recycling program that works without government oversight or official decree. There's a clear hierarchy in this world of waste. The rag pickers and bone collectors, while at the bottom of the social ladder, were at least dealing with dry, relatively inoffensive materials. Then there were the dung collectors, the koprologoi. Their name itself is a statement of their social standing. They dealt with the city's most profound and repulsive waste, the human and animal excrement that was so vital to the farming communities outside the city. They would haul the contents of the cesspits and chamber pots out to the countryside where it would be used as fertilizer. Their work was essential, but it was also considered the most disgusting and debasing. Imagine having a job so gross you get a special name for it. It's a kind of professional dignity you can't really aspire to. The value of the refuse was a complex thing. A broken amphora was just trash, but a shard with a name on it was a piece of history. A broken tool was just a piece of metal, but a piece of metal that could be melted down was a piece of wealth. A fascinating and little-known detail is that bones from meals were also a valuable commodity. They weren't just discarded, they were collected and used to make a variety of things, from small tools to jewelry. Bone was a surprisingly versatile material, and a good scavenger could make a living just by finding and collecting the bones that were thrown away from the city's countless meals. It's a powerful testament to the resourcefulness of the human spirit, a person turning a pile of trash into a valuable good. This entire system of scavenging and recycling brings up a compelling question. Historians still debate whether these waste-based professions were seen as a necessary part of the urban economy, or if they were a sign of the city's profound social and economic inequality. Was it just a practical system, a way of dealing with waste and providing a living for the poor? Or was it a visible symbol of the deep and unchangeable chasm between the rich and the poor? A society where some people lived off the literal leavings of others. The truth is probably somewhere in the middle. It was both a necessary system and a painful reminder of a social hierarchy that was as old as the city itself. The scavengers were a necessary part of the urban machine, but they were also the most visible victims of its flaws. As you observe a group of men and boys sifting through a fresh pile of refuse, their movements are quiet and efficient. They are not talking or laughing. They are focused their entire attention on the task at hand. This is not just a job, it's a matter of survival. It's a powerful image of quiet, unglamorous dignity. They are the unseen heroes of Athens, the people who keep the city from being completely overwhelmed by its own waste. They do the work that no one else wants to do, and they do it without fanfare or recognition. They are a living, breathing testament to the fact that every great civilization is built not just on the backs of its soldiers and its philosophers, but on the backs of its trash collectors and its scavengers. As the morning continues, you feel a new sense of purpose in the air. The sounds of the city have a new bureaucratic rhythm. You've seen the filth, the scavengers, and the raw reality of life in ancient Athens. But this wasn't a city without rules. The Athenians were, after all, the great lawgivers. They had a code for everything from who could vote to how property was handled, and in their own way, they also had laws about waste. You find yourself in the agora, the political and commercial heart of the city, where public decrees would have been posted for all to see. Here on a stone stele, you can almost read the words of some long-dead lawmaker trying to bring order to the chaos. This is where you see the first often ineffective attempts by city officials to create a system for public sanitation. You can imagine the scene. A man stands before a crowd unrolling a scroll, his voice booming over the clamor of the market. He's announcing a new law, a decree from the assembly. He would be saying something like, "By the will of the assembly, all refuse must be disposed of at least 1 mile outside the city walls. Those found in violation will be fined." The crowd, you imagine, would nod along, a murmur of agreement passing through them. But you, having seen the reality of the streets, know that the words on the scroll are a world away from the actions of the people. A general historical fact is that ancient Athenian lawgivers did in fact create statutes regarding waste disposal, including penalties for littering and mandates for where refuse could be deposited. These laws were an acknowledgement of a problem, a formal attempt to bring some semblance of order to a very disorderly city. The question, of course, is whether anyone ever listened. The Athenians had laws, but they didn't have a modern police force. So who was responsible for enforcing these rules? A unique and little-known detail is the role of the astynomoi, or agoranomoi, who were city officials responsible for policing public spaces, including sanitation. Their job was an impossible one. They were tasked with keeping the streets clean, ensuring that businesses weren't creating a public nuisance, and enforcing the laws about waste. You can picture them, a small group of officials walking through the crowded market, trying to fine a farmer for leaving a pile of manure behind his stall. It would have been like trying to stop a tide with a handful of sand. The sheer volume of waste and the complete lack of a proper system for dealing with it would have made their job a constant, frustrating battle. You can almost hear them now trying to give someone a ticket for leaving a broken pot on the street. "Sir, do you know how much a bushel of grain costs these days, and you're fining me for a piece of trash?" It's a classic example of a law without a practical way to enforce it. The laws themselves were often a mix of the practical and the symbolic. The mandate to dump waste a mile outside the city walls was a real physical attempt to move the problem. But the fines for littering and other minor offenses were probably more of a symbolic gesture, a way of saying, "We are a well-ordered state." Historians still debate whether the ancient Athenian sanitation laws were ever consistently enforced, or if they were more of a symbolic gesture of a well-ordered state. Were they a sincere attempt to improve public health, or were they just for show? The evidence, which includes the very dirty streets you've been walking on for days, would suggest the latter. A law is only as good as its enforcement, and in ancient Athens, the will to enforce these laws seems to have been lacking. The city had other more pressing matters to attend to: war's politics, philosophy. Sanitation was a low priority, and the laws reflected that. They were a nice idea, but not a practical one. You can feel the tension in the air. The people are living their lives, and the laws, for the most part, are just words on a stone. A man walks by and casually spits into the street, a small but defiant act. A woman sweeps her doorway and sends a small cascade of dirt and crumbs into the street. These are not acts of rebellion, they are just a part of the daily routine. The laws are a nice idea, a high-minded concept, but the reality on the ground is a very different thing. It's a classic gap between theory and practice, a problem that every civilization from ancient Athens to our own has had to deal with. The laws say one thing, but the people do another. The lawgivers of Athens, men like Solon, were celebrated for their wisdom. They created the foundations of democracy and justice. But when it came to the day-to-day realities of life, they were often out of their depth. They could write a law, but they couldn't create a system to deal with the inevitable result of 100,000 people living in one place. They were brilliant at the abstract, but not so great at the concrete. They gave us democracy, but they also gave us a city that was by modern standards a public health nightmare. The sun is beginning to set, casting a long, final light over the city. The noise of the market is dying down and a different kind of quiet is settling over the streets. You've seen this city in all of its filthy, glorious reality. You've felt the discomfort, you've smelled the smells, and you've understood the impossible contradictions that define daily life here. But as you prepare to leave, you realize that the story of ancient Athenian trash isn't just about the past, it's about the present. It's a story that continues to be told not in books or grand speeches, but in the dirt, in the fragments of pottery, and in the layers of refuse that lie buried beneath the modern city of Athens. The legacy of their filth is in a profound and ironic way our most direct connection to their lives. You step back, and the sounds of the past fade to a low hum. You're no longer there, but the feeling of the place lingers. You've seen the physical evidence of a society that was brilliant, and yet in some ways incredibly naive. They gave us democracy, but they also gave us a masterclass in how not to deal with public sanitation. And now, centuries later, their waste is our treasure. A fundamental historical fact is that archaeological excavations in and around Athens, particularly in the areas that served as ancient dumping grounds, have been an invaluable source of information for historians and archaeologists. The soil, once just a repository for filth, is now a time capsule, a record of a society's daily life that is more honest and complete than any written account. The poets and philosophers wrote about grand ideas, but the garbage tells you what they actually ate for dinner. It tells you about their economy, their technology, and their struggles in a way that no text ever could. Imagine an archaeologist on their hands and knees carefully sifting through the layers of the ancient city. They are not looking for gold or magnificent statues. They are looking for trash. They are looking for broken pottery, for discarded bones, for old tools, and for 100 other things that were thrown away. This is their primary source material. A fascinating and little-known detail is the discovery of specific garbage pits that contain a complete or nearly complete record of a single household's waste over a short period of time. These pits are a goldmine of data, a literal snapshot of a family's life. You can see what they ate, what kinds of vessels they used, what they broke, and what they threw away. It's a very intimate and very honest look into the past. It's a reminder that every piece of trash, no matter how small, has a story to tell. It's a powerful thought that the things they tried to hide from their city are the things that are now telling us the most about it. We are in a very real sense the beneficiaries of their bad hygiene. This brings up a fascinating debate among scholars. Historians still debate whether the incredible preservation of ancient refuse provides a more accurate picture of daily life than the written texts of the elite. The texts, after all, were written by the powerful, the wealthy, and the educated. They tell a story of a society that was clean, orderly, and philosophically minded. The garbage, on the other hand, tells a story of a society that was messy, smelly, and full of human foibles. Which one is the real story? Which one is the more accurate reflection of daily life? The answer is probably both, but the trash gives us a kind of raw, unvarnished truth that is impossible to get from the written record. It's the truth of the people, not the truth of the powerful. The story of Athenian trash is also a story of human ingenuity and resilience. They were a people who found a way to survive and thrive in conditions that we would find intolerable. They created a culture of incredible beauty and complexity, all while living in a sea of their own refuse. They found a way to reuse, to recycle, and to survive on the leavings of others. The scavengers, the dung collectors, and the rag pickers were not just the victims of a flawed society. They were a vital and necessary part of it. They were the ones who kept the whole system from collapsing under the weight of its own waste. So as you come back to your own time, to your own space with its clean floors and its organized trash disposal, you're left with a powerful thought. The ancient Greeks were not just a people of marble temples and great ideas. They were a people of filth, of struggle, and of an incredible quiet resilience. The story of their trash is a story about all of us, about the fundamental problems of living in a society, and about the endless human struggle to create order out of chaos. It's a reminder that even in the most beautiful and brilliant of places, there is always a mess, and that the mess in the end is often what tells the most important story. It's a humbling thought that our greatest legacy might not be our greatest achievements, but the garbage we leave behind. And in ancient Athens, they left behind a mountain of it, a mountain that is still to this day telling their story. The hum of the fan, the quiet in the room, it all begins to pull you back. The vibrant, noisy, and yes, smelly world of ancient Athens begins to dissolve its sharp edges, blurring its colors, fading to a soft, golden glow. The smell of the street is replaced by the cool, clean air of your own room. The echoes of the past recede, a gentle whisper in the darkness. You can let go of it now. The journey is over, the questions answered, the truth revealed. You can close your eyes and let the images soften, the sounds melt into silence. The struggle of a long-dead city is not your own, and the weight of its past is not yours to carry. The marble and the muck, the gods and the garbage, it all settles into a quiet history, a memory of a time and place that is now once again just a whisper in the wind. All that's left is the gentle hum of the fan, the softness of your blankets, and the perfect, peaceful quiet of the night. Sleep now. Let it all fade away. The journey is complete.